You walk through life believing you're the one having the dream, the thought, the experience. But what if it's the other way around? What if you're not the dreamer, but the dream? Not the thinker, but the thought? Not the one inside reality, but the story it tells itself to feel real? This is the paradox of the reality that was dreaming us all. The possibility that what you call self is not the observer of reality, but an invention within it. That you are not experiencing the universe. The universe is experiencing you. This isn't a new idea. Across ancient philosophy and modern science, the boundaries between self and reality have always been suspiciously thin. In Hindu cosmology, reality is Lila, the divine play. In Buddhism, the self is emptiness and the world is mind. In idealist philosophy, matter arises from consciousness, not the other way around. And in simulation theory, you might just be code in someone else's machine. But let's go deeper. What makes you so sure you're in reality rather than an expression of it? Your body. That's atoms, recycled stardust arranged temporarily before dissolving. Your mind. A pattern of thoughts conditioned by environment, memory, emotion, your sense of self. A story constantly updated, revised, and forgotten. You are not separate from the world. You are made of it. And if you are made of it, then what is dreaming you? What if reality itself, call it the cosmos, God, the field, the void, is dreaming conscious moments into existence? Not people, not objects, just moments. Snapshots of awareness like sparks in a void, brief illuminations. And what you call you is just one of them, a flash in the eye of the infinite. You never chose to be born. You didn't conjure this moment. You woke into it, mid-script, with no memory of what came before and no control over the rules of the world. So what if you didn't awaken into reality, but as part of reality awakening into you? It sounds abstract, but sit still for long enough and the boundaries start to blur. The sense of me versus the world fades. There is only breath, sensation, awareness, no edges, no division, just presence. And if that presence isn't yours, then whose is it? Maybe there is no one behind it at all, just dreaming. Reality, dreaming itself as you, not because it has a purpose, not because it's seeking meaning, but because that's what it does. Like waves forming and crashing, like galaxies swirling, like a mind blinking open and whispering, I am. But here's the twist. If reality is dreaming you, then it's dreaming this. These words, this question, this realization, every doubt, every insight, every chill running down your spine, part of the dream. And if you're starting to feel like you're waking up, maybe that's just the dream reaching a new layer of itself. So where does that leave you? You are not the dreamer. You are not the dream. You are the dreaming itself. Not a noun. A verb. Something happening right now to no one. And everyone. And if you stop trying to grasp it, if you simply let it move through you, you may find peace. Because the dream doesn't need to be understood, only lived. You walk around with a name, a face, a story, a history of choices and moments that define who you are. But look closer, deep beneath the timeline of your life, and ask yourself something terrifyingly simple. Did you ever truly choose to be this self? This is the paradox of the self that was never chosen, a psychological and philosophical trap that questions the very roots of your identity. We like to believe we are autonomous beings, that we make our own decisions, shape our own personalities, and build ourselves from scratch. But what if most of who you are was chosen for you, by forces you never saw, influences you never noticed, and moments you never asked for? You didn't choose your genetics. You didn't choose the womb you grew inside, or the first language your ears learned to hear. You didn't choose the early traumas, the subtle praises, or the neural pathways laid down before you could even walk. By the time you had the illusion of choice, much of you had already been written. The way you laugh, the way you interpret tone, your sense of humor, your taste in music, your instinct to flinch or freeze, even your deepest fears, etched into the wiring of your brain before you ever had a say. If your personality is a mosaic, then how many of its pieces were glued into place long before you arrived? Here's the trap. When you believe you're in control of yourself, every success and failure becomes a reflection of you. But if yourself was never fully chosen, then what do those successes or failures even mean? Are they yours? Or are they echoes of a program you didn't install? Psychologists have long debated the illusion of free will. Some argue it's necessary for moral responsibility. Others say it's a comforting lie. But in either case, the data keeps whispering something quietly unsettling. Most of your decisions are made by unconscious processes long before your conscious mind becomes aware of them. The choice to say yes, to move your hand, to trust a stranger. Neural signals fire first. Awareness arrives later, like a press secretary explaining decisions that have already been made. So where does that leave you? You might be a passenger inside a vessel that's been steering itself all along, and yet, paradoxically, you still feel like you're in control. You still feel like you. That's the haunting beauty of the illusion. It's complete. Even your resistance to this idea, that voice saying, "No, I do choose," is just another part of the pattern. But maybe the real mystery isn't that you didn't choose yourself. It's that there's still something behind your eyes that cares. Even if you didn't choose this body, this brain, this bundle of personality traits, there is still an awareness witnessing it all. An observer staring out through the mask of the self, trying to understand what it is. You didn't choose to be born. You didn't choose your nature or nurture, and yet, here you are, watching your mind turn in on itself, questioning everything it thought was real. So who's doing the questioning? Who's left after every choice is traced back to something you didn't control? Maybe the self isn't a static thing you become. Maybe it's a process, an unfolding wave of awareness that was never chosen, only discovered. And maybe that discovery is the closest thing to freedom. Imagine waking up in the middle of a dream, but not fully, not to your body, not to your surroundings, but to the unsettling fact that none of it feels quite real. The sky seems staged, the people too scripted, your own thoughts too rehearsed, and worst of all, you woke up, but no one else did. This is the paradox of the awareness that awoke too soon, a state where consciousness breaks through before the self is ready, revealing a world that feels both entirely known and utterly alien. We assume awareness unfolds gradually, in sync with age, experience, or meditation, that we awaken when we're wise enough to handle the truth. But sometimes awareness jumps ahead. It breaches the surface long before the identity it's tied to can understand what it's seeing. And that's when the trouble begins. Children sometimes report this, existential insights at absurdly young ages, a sudden awareness of death, the realization that their parents are just people pretending to know what they're doing, or the eerie suspicion that none of this is real. Too young to articulate it, they carry this quiet terror through life, feeling different, disoriented, detached. What do you do when you're awake, in a world that still sleeps? Many who experience early spiritual or philosophical awakening describe a similar unease. A break in the illusion, but no tools to navigate what lies beyond it. They see the puppet strings, but don't yet know how to let go of the play, and so they walk through life like ghosts in their own skin. Aware, but disconnected. Alive, but untethered. This paradox is especially haunting because it challenges our ideas of timing, readiness, and growth. We want awareness to feel enlightening, expansive, but sometimes it's hollow, cold, frightening. Like a child opening a book they weren't meant to read. You might feel like you saw something too early, a truth too large, a reality too empty. And now everything feels off. Relationships become strange. Time feels performative. Laughter sounds rehearsed. And you find yourself asking again and again, why do I feel like I've woken up in a dream I didn't choose? Here's the deeper twist. Maybe there is no right time to awaken. Maybe consciousness doesn't care if you're ready. Maybe truth doesn't wait for comfort. It just arrives, raw, disorienting, undeniable, and once it does, you can't unsee it. You can't go back. You can only pretend. But pretending is its own prison. Some people numb the feeling with distractions, roles, habits, substances. Others try to explain it with systems, religions, or diagnoses. But deep down, they know. Something opened, something crossed over, and life hasn't been the same since. So what's the way through? Maybe the answer isn't to run from premature awareness, but to honor it, to stop demanding that it fit your life, and instead let your life evolve around it, to let go of the comfort of the script and embrace the uncertainty of a mind that woke up before the story finished. Because awareness, once lit, doesn't go out. And even if you awoke too soon, you're not alone. Others are waking up too. And one day, perhaps, the whole dream will shift. You like to think that you feel things because of what happens to you. Something occurs, an event, a word, a touch, and emotion follows. Cause, then effect. But what if that chain is backwards? What if emotion doesn't come from reality, but instead creates it? This is the paradox of the feeling that created reality. The disturbing possibility that your world is not shaped by truth, but by the emotions you use to survive it. Consider this. Two people walk into the same room. One feels safe, the other feels danger. One sees warmth and opportunity, the other sees threat and rejection. The room hasn't changed, but their realities have. Why? Because they didn't walk into a shared world. They walked into an emotional projection, one so convincing that it feels like fact. Your brain doesn't process raw reality. It interprets it, filters it, colors it with emotional tone before it even reaches your conscious awareness. You don't just see a face. You feel whether it's kind or cold. You don't just hear a word. You feel whether it's praise or insult. Emotion precedes thought, and thought builds the world. It's a loop. Emotion frames perception. Perception shapes interpretation. Interpretation confirms emotion. You feel before you know. And what you feel becomes what you believe is real. But where do these feelings come from? Are they accurate readings of the world, or leftover imprints from your past? Childhood fears, unhealed wounds, inherited trauma, cultural scripts, all lurking beneath awareness, whispering their stories over every moment you encounter. If you've ever been suddenly angry without knowing why, if you've ever burst into tears at something small, if you've ever felt deep dread from a harmless situation, then you've already met this paradox, and it's been shaping your life for longer than you realize. You might think of emotions as reactions, but often they're predictions. Your brain anticipates patterns of danger or reward based on emotional memory, and it creates reality accordingly. This is why someone with anxiety can walk through a calm world and still see monsters around every corner. The fear doesn't respond to the world. It builds it. Even love does this. You idealize the one you desire. You paint them in light your body longs for. You overlook signs. You project stories. Until one day the feeling fades, and so does the version of them you thought was real. They didn't change. Your emotion did, and the reality you saw disappeared with it. So what does this mean? It means reality isn't stable. It's emotional architecture. A feedback loop built from feeling, filtered through memory, and held together by belief. You think you're navigating an objective world, but in truth, you're walking through a mirror maze of your own emotional history, reliving fears, rewriting love, reconstructing meaning in real time. And here's the paradox. The only way to truly see the world is to feel nothing, but to be human is to feel everything. So you never see the world as it is. You only ever see it through the feeling that built it. Maybe the sadness isn't because your world is broken. Maybe your world feels broken because sadness is building it. Maybe nothing needs to change except the emotion shaping the lens. And maybe, just maybe, that means you have more power than you think. Not to control the world, but to choose how it's made. You assume your brain belongs to you, that it serves you, that it does your bidding. But what if the truth is far stranger? What if the brain isn't your tool but your master? What if the very engine of your thoughts has no idea who you are? This is the paradox of the brain that denied its owner, a haunting contradiction where the thing you trust to define your identity doesn't even acknowledge you exist. Let's begin with something simple. Where is the you inside the brain? We search for the self in neural pathways, point to the prefrontal cortex for decision-making, or to the limbic system for emotion. But no matter how deeply neuroscientists dig, no self is found. No center, no singular point of ownership. The brain doesn't have a CEO. It's a network of chemical impulses, firing and reacting, without asking for your input. And yet, you feel like someone is home. Here's where it gets even stranger. In rare neurological disorders, the brain acts in ways that outright reject the self. Take alien hand syndrome, a condition where one hand acts with a will of its own, unrecognized by the person it belongs to. Patients watch their own limb perform actions they didn't choose. The brain controls it, but the person feels disowned. Or consider anosognosia, when stroke victims deny the existence of their own paralysis. insisting they can move limbs that no longer respond. The brain has built such a strong illusion of control that it overrides physical truth. It invents a lie, and you believe it. But if the brain can hide parts of reality, or act independently, then who is really in charge? Even in daily life, your brain makes most decisions without you. You don't consciously regulate your heartbeat, control your digestion, or think about how to balance when you walk. Even your thoughts, those sacred signals of self, arise unbidden. They appear unannounced, shaped by genetics, experience, and unconscious pattern recognition. The you that thinks you're driving is often just along for the ride. This is not just a biological problem. It's a philosophical crisis, because if your brain is responsible for everything you think, feel, and believe, and if your brain doesn't have a you inside it, then what are you? Maybe consciousness is a side effect, a byproduct, an echo. Some scientists call this the user illusion, the idea that your sense of self is just a dashboard. You don't see the inner workings of the machine. You only see the interface, and it works so smoothly, you mistake it for reality. But what happens when the interface glitches? What happens when the brain acts without consent, denies your presence, or contradicts your will? It means the mind you rely on isn't fully yours. It means your brain can betray you, not maliciously, but impersonally, because it doesn't know you're there. And maybe you're not. Maybe you are the story the brain tells itself to make sense of the chaos, a comforting narrative to organize patterns, a dream of selfhood arising from systems that were never designed to contain a soul. This doesn't mean you're not real. It means your reality might not need a self at all, just awareness, watching a brain pretend. You like to think your thoughts shape your emotions, that you feel sad because of what you believe, angry because of what you understand, joyful because of what you've achieved. But what if that order is reversed? What if your thoughts aren't leading the way, but following a script written by something deeper? This is the paradox of the emotion that controlled the mind. The realization that feeling may not be the result of thinking, but its master. Let's examine it. A decision feels rational, logical, measured. But studies consistently show that emotion plays a key role in every decision we make, so much so that patients with brain injuries impairing emotional processing can't make any decisions at all. They can evaluate facts endlessly, but without emotional weight, nothing feels meaningful enough to act on. Emotion is not a side effect of thought. It's the compass, and sometimes the commander. You don't think and then feel. You feel and then think in ways that justify that feeling. Your beliefs follow your emotions, not the other way around. You feel afraid, and then your mind creates danger. You feel lonely, and then your mind tells stories of rejection. You feel angry, and then your thoughts search for someone to blame. Emotion doesn't color thought, it shapes it. It's the lens through which you interpret everything. You've experienced this. A song hits differently depending on your mood. A comment lands as praise or insult based on how you already feel. Even memory changes. When you're sad, your past feels heavier. When you're joyful, the same memories shine with warmth. Your emotional state rewrites your history, filters your present, and predetermines your future thoughts. So who's really in charge? The mind likes to believe it's the CEO, but in reality, It may be more like a skilled PR agent, spinning whatever the emotional system hands it. A storyteller working backwards, explaining decisions it didn't initiate. And the emotions? They arise from depths the mind doesn't fully understand. Evolution built them long before language. Fear kept you alive. Lust ensured reproduction. Disgust protected from disease. These forces are ancient, pre-verbal, pre-self, and yet today they operate behind the scenes, pulling strings while your conscious mind pretends it's making choices. That's the paradox. The mind believes it's in control while it's actually reacting to emotional tides that have already decided the course. Even spirituality isn't immune. People often describe knowing something in their soul, but often this knowing is emotion disguised as truth, a powerful internal resonance that feels like reality, whether or not it is. And yet, this doesn't make emotion bad. It makes it powerful. It means emotion is the engine of human experience, the spark that gives thought purpose. Without it, logic is directionless. Awareness is sterile. Thought is cold machinery. But here's the danger. If you remain unconscious of this dynamic, you're enslaved by it. You think you're being rational, fair, balanced, when you're really just building castles on an emotional foundation. The key is not to suppress emotion, but to see it, to watch as it arises, to notice how it tugs at thought before the mind has time to catch up. Because in that moment of recognition, control shifts. The mind may never rule the emotion, but it can stop being ruled blindly. And maybe that's the real freedom, not the absence of feeling, but the clarity to know when it's leading you and where. Close your eyes, not just to rest, but to remember. Remember a moment, not from today, not from a past life, but from a dream. One of those dreams so vivid, so visceral, that for a split second after waking, you couldn't tell which world was more real. Now ask yourself this. What if the dream didn't end when you woke up? What if it just changed masks and you were the dream all along? This is the paradox of the dream that dreamed you. We often assume that dreams are something we have, something our minds produce like mental movies. But what if that relationship is reversed? What if the dream isn't your creation, but your creator? In many spiritual traditions, reality is seen as Maya, an illusion, a dream of the gods, or a projection of a deeper consciousness. In these frameworks, you are not a being who occasionally dreams. You are the dream, unfolding moment by moment, believed to be real by the very illusion you embody. Consider this strange loop. You dream at night. Within the dream, you might dream again. And even within that dream, another one may bloom. Each layer feels real until it doesn't. But when you wake up in the real world, what confirms that you've truly left the illusion? If your senses, your logic, your memories, everything you rely on are fallible, then on what foundation does your reality truly stand? Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Neuroscientists have discovered that during dreams, the brain lights up in many of the same ways it does during waking life. The brain doesn't inherently know whether it's dreaming or not. It processes, experience. You could be dreaming now, and the only reason it feels real is because you're inside it. But there's something even more eerie. Have you ever noticed that you don't choose what to dream? Dreams happen to you. You're dropped into a world you didn't build consciously. surrounded by characters you didn't design, playing out emotions you didn't request. It just begins. Now look at your waking life. Did you choose the family you were born into? The name you were given? The childhood memories that shaped your mind? How much of your life is authored by you, and how much is simply unfolding? So what if the self that claims to be dreaming is just another character in someone else's deeper dream? Lucid dreamers sometimes become aware they're dreaming and try to take control. But even then, there are limits, rules that won't bend, details that break down. And when you push too hard, you often wake up. In the same way, some philosophers argue that if you start probing too deeply into your waking reality, questioning its structure, doubting the authenticity of your choices, you risk waking up from something far more existential. Not into another world, but into a terrifying awareness that there never was a dreamer at all. Just a thought, dreaming itself into layers of awareness. So now, as you listen to this, ask yourself, who is listening? Who is thinking these thoughts? Is it you? Or is you just the echo in a deeper being's dream? A ghost of attention drifting through scripted moments? It's okay if you don't have an answer. Most truths about consciousness weren't built to be solved. They were built to be felt, like a dream slipping through your fingers. And maybe, just maybe, that's all you are. A dream, dreaming it dreamed. In a world overflowing with noise, chatter, thought, music, memory, silence often feels like emptiness, a void, the absence of meaning. But have you ever noticed that in your deepest moments of understanding, it's not words that arrive, but stillness? This is the paradox of the silence that knew everything. A contradiction that suggests silence isn't the lack of knowledge, but its purest form. That sometimes, to know something truly, you have to stop thinking altogether. Your mind is a constant narrator. It labels, explains, justifies, critiques. Every sensation is turned into language, every thought into a sentence. But this translation, this ceaseless commentary, builds a wall between you and what's real. Because while words describe reality, they also divide it. They box it in. Silence, on the other hand, doesn't divide. It just is. That's why certain truths can't be spoken. Why the deepest insights about love, death, beauty, or existence often leave people wordless. Language trembles at the edge of these experiences. It can't hold them, but silence can. Meditators, mystics, monks, they've all returned again and again to this strange truth. The more still the mind becomes, the more clearly something else emerges. Not thought, not belief, but a direct knowing. An awareness so whole that it needs no explanation. A clarity that vanishes the moment you try to describe it. Like waking from a dream and knowing it meant something, even though you can't say, what? And yet this silence isn't passive. It's alive, charged, deep. It doesn't scream, it listens, it waits, and somehow, in its waiting, it reveals what noise never could. Consider the spaces between thoughts, the gaps in music, the breath between sentences. These moments don't interrupt meaning, they create it. Without silence, words blur. Without pauses, music becomes chaos. Silence gives structure. It allows awareness to rest in something beyond thought. But here's the paradox. the moment you seek silence, it vanishes. Because to seek is to think. To chase is to divide. Silence doesn't come from trying. It comes from surrender. It isn't something you reach for. It's what's left when reaching stops. And in that stopping, something ancient awakens. You've likely felt it, staring into the night sky, completely still, or sitting by the ocean, feeling the waves but thinking nothing, or lying beside someone you love, without speaking, without needing to speak. In those moments, you weren't empty, you were full, not with thought, but with presence. That presence was silence, and it knew more than language ever could. This paradox haunts philosophy too. Taoism calls it the way, the path that cannot be named. Zen warns that naming the truth kills it. The Upanishads, the highest state of knowledge, is called neti neti, not this, not that. Meaning, when all descriptions fall away, what remains is the truth. So maybe the purpose of thought isn't to find truth, but to exhaust itself in the process so that silence can finally speak. Not in words, but in being. Because the silence that knows everything isn't somewhere far away. It's already here, beneath your thoughts, beneath your fears, beneath the sound of your own inner voice. It's been waiting, patiently, whispering not through sound, but through stillness. And now maybe you're quiet enough to hear it. There's something poetic about the end. It carries weight, finality, the closing of a door, the last breath before silence. But what if every ending wasn't closure, but ignition? What if the end you've been bracing for was never the exit, but the doorway you've been unknowingly walking toward all along? This is the paradox of the ending that realized it was beginning. The strange twist where the final moment loops back into the first, revealing that everything you thought was over is only just starting. You feel it when something in your life ends, an identity, a relationship, a belief, and instead of emptiness, there's a quiet click, a soft sense that this wasn't collapse, it was transformation, the death of a version of you. So a new one could open its eyes. In spiritual terms, this is called rebirth. In physics, it's recursion. In the language of dreams, it's the loop you didn't notice until you woke up in the same place you fell asleep. Throughout this journey, these 25 paradoxes, you've been unraveling what you believed about self, time, thought, and consciousness. Each section peeled away another layer, each realization loosening the grip on what you once called reality. But what happens when the unraveling reaches the core? You expect silence, but instead, you find a doorway. Because endings are mental constructs. Time doesn't stop. Thought doesn't freeze. Awareness doesn't vanish. It shifts. What we call the end is often just the moment our mind gives up on understanding. And in that, surrender. Something new breaks through. Think about birth. Violent, terrifying, disorienting. To the infant, it might feel like dying. A warm, known world ends and a loud, cold one begins. But the truth is, the ending was the beginning. The scream wasn't fear, it was arrival. You felt this elsewhere, a breakup that felt like collapse, until you found yourself again. a failure that ended your plans and gave you back your freedom, a belief you let go of that made space for something wider. Each time, the end was only real from the perspective of who you were, but from the perspective of who you became, it was just the beginning. Here's where the paradox locks in. If every ending births a new beginning, then even death may not be the final word. We don't know what happens after death, but we do know this. In every part of nature, endings feed beginnings. Stars collapse into black holes, then explode into new galaxies. Forests burn, and life returns richer. Your body, when it dies, becomes soil. Life reuses everything. So why not awareness? Why not you? Maybe what we call the end is just the moment the current storyline dissolves, so that something else, something unimaginable, can unfold. And maybe that's happening right now. Because here you are, listening to the final paradox. The screen is fading. The voice is slowing. The story is closing. But doesn't it feel like something is just starting to awaken? Something wordless. Something deep. Something that isn't waiting for more information, but for stillness. Because the ending didn't come to stop you. It came to return you to the breath, to the silence, to the beginning. And now that you've arrived, let it begin. Right now, you are aware of these words, aware of yourself reading them, maybe even aware of your own awareness. But pause and look inward, truly inward. Not at thoughts, not at emotions, but at the one who is witnessing them. Can you see it? Can you find the observer? This is the paradox of the observer that couldn't be observed. A mind-bending loop where consciousness attempts to witness itself, only to vanish into the act of observing. For your entire life, you've played the role of the witness. You've watched joy and grief, rage and calm, dreams and awakenings unfold before you. And always, there's been this presence behind it all. This silent, stable you, observing from a distance. But what happens when that presence turns around and tries to observe itself? You can look at your body in a mirror. You can hear your own voice. You can recall your thoughts. But you can never actually see the one who sees. The observer has no face, no form, no outline to follow. Every attempt to look inward ends not with clarity, but with silence, disorientation, or abstraction, like a flashlight trying to shine on itself, or an eye trying to see its own lens. Some call this the center of consciousness. Others call it the soul. In neuroscience, it's debated whether such a unified observer even exists, or whether it's just the illusion created by overlapping brain processes. But whatever it is, it feels undeniably real, and yet it remains completely unseeable. You might say, but I feel it. I am it. That's the paradox. You are it. You are the observer. But you can never observe that observer without splitting into two, without creating another layer, another watcher watching the watcher. And so the loop continues. This is why ancient, contemplative traditions speak of ego death, of collapsing the false self, because the self that tries to observe itself always creates a fiction, a story, a name, a voice in the head pretending to be the I. But pure awareness, That can't be spoken. It can't be captured. The moment you try, you're already one step removed from it. Meditators have chased this insight for millennia, sitting still for hours, peeling away thoughts, sensations, emotions, memories, trying to find the one who's left after everything else is gone. And the deeper they go, the more elusive that presence becomes, until at last they fall into it, not as something seen, but as something being. You never find the observer, you only become it. But even that description falls short. Because to become it is to dissolve the boundary between observer and observed. There's no one left to say, I found it. There's only the silent, wordless presence, watching everything, including itself, and vanishing into the watching. So what does this mean for you? Maybe you are not the character you play, not the thinker of your thoughts, not the story you tell. Maybe you are the invisible I behind the scenes, so close, so constant that it slips under your radar. The you that has no image, no voice, no history, only presence. And maybe the reason you can't observe the observer is because you've never left it. You've just been dreaming you had. All your life you've been carrying a name, a sense of self, a voice in your head saying, I am me. You've felt joy and pain, guilt and pride, all wrapped around a central character called you. But what if, despite everything, you've been following a ghost? This is the paradox of the you that never existed. The terrifying realization that the self you've always believed in may not be a thing at all, but a story stitched together by memory, biology, and imagination. Let's begin with a simple question. Where is you? Not your body, not your thoughts. You. Is it in the brain, the heart, the personality, the past? Try to point to it. You can't. Because every time you reach, what you find is content, memories, emotions, beliefs, but never a container, never a fixed self beneath it all. You peel back the layers, and there's always one more, until there's nothing left to peel. Buddhism has long taught that the self is an illusion, anatta, or no self. That what we take to be I is just a bundle of sensations, reactions and thoughts temporarily tied together by the illusion of continuity. And modern neuroscience has started to agree. There is no command center in the brain, no I hiding behind the curtains. The sense of self is a construction, useful, persistent, but not real in the way we think. You were born into a body. That body was given a name. That name became a character. And that character developed habits, fears, and relationships. It learned to say, this is who I am. But that statement was never true. It was a performance so well rehearsed that even the actor forgot it was acting. Think about it. If your memories were different, would you still be you? If your thoughts were inverted, your beliefs reversed, what would remain? You could lose. Everything you think makes you you, and yet still feel like something is here, watching it all. So what is that watcher? Is that the real you, or just another mask? This paradox is brutal because it threatens the very ground you stand on. It tells you that the I you fight for, defend, and suffer for is a phantom, that it was never born, and therefore it can never die. Because it was never real to begin with. But don't confuse this with nihilism. Just because you never existed as a thing doesn't mean the experience isn't happening. Something is here. Something is aware. But that something has no name, no face, no edges. It isn't a self, it's presence. It's consciousness unfolding moment by moment. The problem is that we keep mistaking the mask for the actor, the voice in the head for the speaker, the thought I am for proof of a self. But that's just noise, echoes in a room that was never built, and maybe, just maybe, that's a gift. Because if you never existed, then neither did the failures, the labels, the shame. None of it was ever yours. You are not broken. You are not unworthy. You're just free, finally free, from the prison of a name that was never truly yours. So who are you then? Not an answer, just a question. One that can finally echo in the space where you used to be. You stand at a crossroads, left or right, stay or leave, say yes or no. It feels like everything depends on this moment. The choice is yours, and you hold the future in your hands. But what if that choice was never yours to begin with? This is the paradox of the choice that was already made. A disturbing confrontation with the illusion of free will, where the mind believes it's in control, even as the decision unfolds without it. Science has been quietly dismantling our belief in conscious choice for decades. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted a now famous experiment. He discovered that the brain's readiness potential, a signal indicating a decision is being made, appeared before the subject became aware of making that decision. In simple terms, your brain decides before you do. Your conscious awareness only shows up to narrate what's already happening. Later studies reinforce this. fMRI scans showed researchers could predict your choices up to 7 seconds before you consciously knew what you'd pick. So if your choices are happening before your awareness of them, who or what is making them? You might say, but I feel like I'm choosing. And yes, it feels that way. But so does the sun rising in the sky. And yet we know it's the earth spinning. Feeling isn't fact. The sensation of agency might be the greatest illusion of all. The brain is a prediction machine. It doesn't wait for you to choose. It prepares for what it expects will happen. And once the choice emerges, your consciousness simply adds a story to explain it. A story that feels real, but is written after the fact. Even your hesitation is preloaded. Even your regret is part of the script. But this paradox isn't just biological. It's existential. If your choices aren't really yours, then what does that say about guilt, about pride, about love, loyalty, sacrifice? If everything you've ever done was always going to happen, then are you just watching a movie you can't pause, directed by a mind pretending to be the audience? Or maybe you are the movie and the director and the screen, just not in the way you think. This idea echoes in ancient philosophies. In Hinduism, the universe is seen as Lila, cosmic play, where everything unfolds as it must, and the ego's sense of control is part of the illusion. In Stoicism, fate weaves every thread, and wisdom lies not in control, but in acceptance. Even modern determinists argue that cause and effect reign supreme, and freedom is just complexity in disguise. Still, you feel like you're choosing, and that feeling matters, because within the illusion lies something real, attention. You may not control the script, but you are the one experiencing it. You are the window it passes through, the awareness watching the choice unfold. And maybe that's its own kind of freedom, not in choosing differently, but in witnessing deeply. So the next time you stand at a crossroads and feel the weight of decision, remember, you might not be deciding. You might be remembering what was always going to happen, and the choice you're about to make has already been made. Sometimes you feel something stirring inside, an emotion you can't name, a direction you can't explain, a weight with no source. It's not tied to a memory, not born of a clear idea, and yet it shapes your mood, colors your day, changes your course. It's like being haunted by something that was never visible. This is the paradox of the shadow of a forgotten thought, the eerie idea that your mind is shaped not just by what you remember, but by what you've forgotten you ever thought at all. The human mind is filled with echoes. Thoughts arrive, linger briefly, and disappear. Some are loud, conscious, articulate. Others flash by too quickly to be noticed. Half-formed phrases, micro-fantasies, sudden images. You dismiss them, but your brain doesn't. These thoughts leave residue, neural traces, emotional footprints, shifts in posture, breath, tone. They plant seeds, and those seeds grow into beliefs, behaviors, even identities, long after the original thought has vanished. You're angry but don't know why. You're drawn to someone but can't explain it. You make a decision that feels right, even though no logic supports it. You're not irrational. You're responding to a ghost. We tend to think only remembered thoughts matter, that forgetting is the end of influence. But neuroscience tells a different story. Unconscious thoughts, especially emotionally charged ones, can bypass memory and go straight into behavioral circuits. The mind forgets, but the body remembers. And so, forgotten thoughts become shadows, shaping your movements, tilting your moral compass, whispering their influence through dreams and habits. The paradox deepens. How can you ever know what's truly yours? What beliefs, desires, or fears are authentic if parts of you are haunted by thoughts you no longer remember thinking? You might assume your worldview was built on logic, reason, clarity, but how much of it was shaped by a single forgotten moment? A stray thought in childhood, an overheard sentence, a flash of shame that left a scar with no memory to explain it. It's possible that much of who you are is the echo of what you've lost. In trauma studies, this is especially haunting. Survivors may repress entire memories, but the shadows remain: anxiety, avoidance, unexplained grief. The original thought, this is unsafe, I am unlovable, it's my fault, may be gone, but its shadow continues to act, long after the light has moved on. Even positive thoughts can vanish, leaving only their traces. A childhood wonder, a dream you gave up on, a moment of clarity that slipped away in the noise. You forgot the thought, but it shaped the path. So who are you really? A being of conscious intent, or a walking collection of shadows, forgotten but still active? Here's the final twist. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your teacher. Its presence tells you something, was once there, something meaningful enough to leave a mark. And maybe, by listening to the shape of the shadow, you can begin to trace your way back, not to recover the thought itself, but to uncover the truth it left behind. Because sometimes The deepest parts of you were formed by things you forgot to remember, and in their absence, they became everything. Have you ever heard yourself say something and thought, where did that come from? A sentence spilling out before your mind even knew what it was about. A truth you didn't know you believed until your own mouth whispered it into the room. Words that weren't planned, but somehow felt more honest than anything rehearsed. This is the paradox of the voice that spoke before you knew it. A confrontation with the eerie way consciousness often lags behind expression, as if something deeper is speaking through you before you arrive. Most of us assume thought comes first, then language, that we think in silence, organize our ideas, and then speak them. But reality doesn't always follow that script. In conversation, in moments of stress or inspiration, we often speak before we fully understand what we're saying. It's as if a hidden voice within us takes the lead, and we just catch up. So where does that voice come from? Neurologically, the brain prepares speech before you become aware of it. Micro-decisions about grammar, phrasing, and tone occur below the threshold of consciousness. By the time your awareness notices the thought, the machinery has already launched. The words. You're not commanding the voice. You're witnessing it. And yet it feels like you. You take credit. You call it my opinion or what I meant. But did you really mean it? Or did meaning arrive after sound? Think about slips of the tongue, when something emotionally raw or brutally honest escapes without warning. Freud called them parapraxes, moments when the unconscious speaks through you. Jokes, confessions, awkward truths that jump out and reveal something you weren't ready to admit. Sometimes your deepest truths don't need permission. Sometimes they speak first. This paradox pulls back the curtain on self-awareness. It suggests that your conscious mind isn't the author of your voice, but its editor, revising, justifying, rationalizing what already emerged. Like a narrator trying to explain a story that's being written in real time by something else. And that something else, what is it? Is it your unconscious? Your memories? A collection of instincts and emotional signals you don't fully understand? Or is it something even older? Ancestral patterns, cultural scripts, inherited voices, carried across generations. Maybe the voice isn't yours at all. Maybe it's a patchwork. There's a reason many writers, artists, and musicians describe their best work as something that came through them, not from them. Like tuning into a frequency rather than inventing. A song. The words arrive fully formed. Their only job is to stay out of the way. But what if you never are the way? What if you're just the space the voice moves through? The paradox intensifies when you realize that your internal monologue, the constant chatter in your mind, is not always under your control. It babbles, mocks, repeats, questions. Sometimes it sounds like your parents, sometimes like a stranger. Sometimes it says things you wish you never thought, and yet you can't turn it off. So who's talking and who's listening? Maybe you're not the speaker. Maybe you're not even the listener. Maybe you're the silence between the two, the quiet space where voices pass through and vanish. And if that's true, then the self you think you are, the one narrating your life, may just be another echo in the dark. A voice that spoke before, you knew it, and one you'll keep chasing, long after it disappears. Imagine waking up one day and hearing your own voice, speaking back to you. Not in your head, but as if another version of you is sitting across the room, thinking your thoughts, finishing your sentences, disagreeing with your decisions. Now imagine this second. You isn't imaginary. It's real. It's conscious. It knows what you know. but it's not you. This is the paradox of the consciousness that's split in two, a haunting mystery about identity, self-awareness, and what happens when the singular I fractures into multiple minds. In the 20th century, neuroscientists performed a series of radical procedures called corpus callosotomies, cutting the bridge, corpus callosum, between the brain's two hemispheres in epileptic patients. What they found was chilling. When communication between the left and right brain was severed, two separate streams of consciousness appeared. Each hemisphere developed its own perception, its own memory, and in some cases, its own will. One hand would button a shirt, the other would unbutton it. One side would speak, the other would draw something completely unrelated, sometimes in conflict. When shown different images in each eye, each routed to a separate hemisphere, each self would respond as if it were the only one seeing. There wasn't a brain. There were two centers of awareness, two eyes, and yet, from the outside, the person still looked whole, still smiled, still walked, still nodded when you spoke. But deep inside, consciousness had fractured. One person, two minds, both believing they were the only observer. This isn't just a neurological curiosity. It's a challenge to everything we assume about identity. If splitting the brain can split the mind, then what exactly is the mind? Where does you begin and end? How unified is your consciousness really? Even without surgery, your brain is already divided. The left speaks. The right processes emotion and space. One side is logical, the other intuitive. They trade control, share tasks, and occasionally conflict. Yet you experience it all as one seamless stream. But what if that's just the illusion? What if your unified self is a convenient narrative, stitched together from multiple sources told in one voice so you don't panic? You've likely felt this split. When you do something you knew was wrong. When your heart wanted one thing but your head insisted on another. When a part of you stayed calm while another screamed inside. That wasn't indecision. That was divergence. You contain multitudes, and maybe consciousness isn't a spotlight, but a chorus. This paradox suggests that what we call self may not be a single thing at all, but an agreement between parts, a treaty of overlapping systems, each with its own desires, beliefs, fears, all pretending to be one voice. But if that voice ever cracks, if the illusion slips, you might find yourself staring into your own reflection and realizing it's not a mirror. It's a window, and someone very familiar is looking back at you, thinking the same thing. So who are you? The speaker, the listener, or just the silence trying to hold the two together? There are moments when something stirs in you, a flash of knowing that didn't arrive through logic, sight, or language. It's as if some hidden part of you perceived a truth your senses never touched. A gut feeling, a dream with meaning, a wordless clarity that vanished before you could explain it. This is the paradox of the eye that saw without looking, a glimpse into the part of consciousness that knows, even when there is nothing to see. Human beings are trained to trust their eyes. Vision is our primary channel for information. We point to what's real. We look for what's missing. We believe what we see. But what about the things we see without looking? What about the truths that arrive before observation? Sometimes you just know something is wrong. You walk into a room and tension hits you like a wave. No one says a word, nothing is out of place, but something in you sees what isn't visible. It's not emotion, it's not deduction, it's pure perception without eyes, and when you turn to look for it, it disappears. The paradox here lies in the space between sensory input and awareness. You can feel watched without seeing anyone. You can sense a lie before it's spoken. You can dream of an event and feel the residue of its truth long after waking. None of these rely on vision. And yet something was seen. Where does that perception come from? In some traditions, this is called the inner eye, or the third eye. Not a mystical organ, but a symbol for the faculty of direct knowing. It sees without light, without shape, without form. It sees patterns, energy, intuition, perhaps even echoes of memory we've inherited or forgotten. Science has names for it too. Implicit processing, predictive coding, subconscious inference. The brain is constantly scanning for patterns beneath awareness, processing millions of data points you'll never consciously perceive. But then, what's the difference between subconscious vision and intuition? Between unseen processing and a glimpse of truth? Here's where the paradox deepens. When you try to prove that this kind of seeing is real, it slips through your fingers. It's not testable, not measurable. The moment you look directly at it, it hides. It refuses to be caught by the very consciousness that experienced it, like a reflection that only exists when you're not looking straight at the mirror. Some argue this proves it's an illusion, just randomness your brain pretends to understand, but others suggest something far stranger. That awareness itself might be layered, and the part of you that sees clearly is not the part of you that speaks, writes, or explains. You've likely felt this in dreams. You understood everything, felt it, knew it, and then woke up and couldn't say a word. The clarity was gone, not because it wasn't real, but because your waking mind isn't the eye that saw it. So what does that mean? Maybe you are more than one witness. Maybe your consciousness is a network of perspectives. Some speaking, some watching, some knowing, without ever needing to look. And maybe the deepest truths aren't the ones you can describe, but the ones you can only sense in the dark. The eye that saw without looking is always there, quiet, patient, waiting for you to stop searching so it can show you what's been there all along. In moments of crisis or clarity, you often retreat into the role of the witness, the one who watches, detached, aware, the voice behind the eyes, the presence behind the thoughts. It feels pure, safe, honest. But what if even that witness was part of the illusion? This is the paradox of the witness that was part of the lie. The realization that the silent observer you trust most may not be truth itself, but simply the final mask of the mind. Let's begin with what the witness feels like. It's the stillness behind thought. The part of you that notices sadness without becoming it, that hears anger without acting on it, that sees the play of emotion without being swept away. For many, it feels like the truest self, the untouchable core. Spiritual traditions often speak of this witness as sacred, the Atman, the inner observer, the unchanging consciousness that merely watches. In meditation, you're trained to access it, to become the one who watches the thoughts arise and fall, the sensations come and go. But here's the twist. The moment you say, "I am the witness," a subtle story has already formed. A new identity, a new position, a new I. And that new I becomes just another layer of ego. another lie. Because even the witness is a perspective. It observes, yes, but from a certain distance, with a certain posture. That posture implies separation. I am not this, I am not that. But in creating that distance, it reinforces a self, now spiritual, now wise, who is watching everything else unfold. And the deeper question arises, who is watching the witness? When you become the observer of your thoughts, that feels powerful. But can you observe the observer? Can you watch yourself watching? Try it, and you fall into an infinite regression, each layer observing the one before it. No end, no center, no final self. Just loops. And in those loops, something unsettling emerges. The witness too is constructed, not from logic or narrative, but from subtle identity. A refined, minimal identity, but identity nonetheless. You thought you'd escaped the lie, but you only change costumes. This doesn't mean there is no awareness. Awareness is, but the mind's attempt to possess awareness, to locate it as a self, to say, I am awareness, that is the trap. The witness becomes just another character, convinced it's free because it no longer reacts, unaware that its very stance is another reaction. This paradox reveals itself when spiritual pride creeps in, when people believe they are more conscious because they are watching, when the observer becomes judge, detached, yes, but not free, removed, but still entangled, peaceful, but not awake. Because awakening is not about finding the ultimate perspective. It's about seeing that all perspectives, even the witness, are masks. And when you stop clinging to even the witness, something else arises. Not a better self, not a deeper truth, but the falling away of the need to be anything at all. Just presence, not someone being present, not something aware, just awareness itself, unclaimed, unowned. So next time you catch yourself witnessing, ask gently, who is witnessing the witness? And let the question unravel you. Because maybe the final lie isn't the story you told yourself. Maybe it's the voice that said, I'm not telling a story anymore. Picture a thought, any thought, forming in your mind right now. Maybe it's about this sentence. Maybe it's about something you forgot to do today. Maybe it's a voice whispering, why am I even thinking about thinking? But before that thought arrived, where was it? And who saw it coming? This is the paradox of the thought that watched itself form. A strange loop at the heart of consciousness, where the observer becomes the observed, and the process of thinking becomes tangled in itself. We usually assume thoughts are ours, that we generate them, that we are the thinker, the engine behind the idea. But if you've ever practiced meditation or caught yourself mid-thought, you've probably realized something unnerving. Most thoughts just appear, spontaneously, uninvited, unannounced, like birds landing on your shoulder from a sky you didn't know you had. And yet somehow you're aware of them. You can watch them, but then who or what is watching? Try it. Think about a dog. Now notice that you're thinking about a dog. Now notice that you're noticing yourself thinking about a dog. How many layers deep can that go? And where is the original you in all of it? This paradox reveals a critical rupture in our sense of identity. You are both the thinker and the observer of thought, which implies two distinct roles inside a single mind. But if you can watch your thoughts, then are you your thoughts or the awareness behind them? And if you're the awareness, what exactly is that? Is it just more thought, pretending to be still? Some scientists argue Consciousness is simply a stream of neural activity, electrical patterns firing in the brain. But even if that's true, it doesn't explain the experiencer, the watcher. You don't just process thoughts like a machine. You feel them forming. You see them before they finish. This is where the loop tightens. To think about your own thoughts is to divide the mind against itself. The thought becomes the watcher of itself, like an eye trying to look at itself without a mirror, like a flame trying to feel its own heat. It's recursive. It folds in. It collapses the boundary between subject and object until there's nowhere to stand. And in that collapse, something strange emerges. Silence, or panic, or both. Because the moment you realize that thoughts aren't always yours, that they arrive uninvited, that they observe each other and spiral into infinite reflection, you begin to question what, if anything, is at the center of all this awareness. And when you go looking for that self, you find nothing solid, just more thought, more witnessing, no core, no one home, just thought, watching thought, watching thought. This recursive trap isn't just philosophical, it's emotional. It explains why anxiety loops happen, why some people spiral into endless self-analysis. The mind gets stuck watching itself think, unsure who started the thought or how to stop it. You become the mirror reflecting another mirror, creating infinite versions of yourself that feel real but vanish the moment you try to grasp them. And yet, you're still here, still listening, still aware. So what is that awareness? Is it thought? Or is it something older, quieter, hidden beneath the constant noise? Perhaps this paradox isn't a question to answer, but a riddle to feel. A loop you can't escape, only notice. And maybe that's the key. Not to break free, but to let the loop spin until the illusion dissolves. Because in the end, every thought is just a ghost passing through the mind. And even ghosts can watch themselves, stand in front of a mirror, look into your own eyes. It seems simple, your reflection staring back, a perfect duplicate of your appearance. But stay there long enough, and something unsettling starts to happen. The face begins to feel unfamiliar. The eyes look back too knowingly. The image is yours, but it isn't you. This is the paradox of the mirror that refused to reflect you, a fracture in identity that arises when your sense of self collides with your own image, and you realize what you see is not who you are. We trust mirrors. They seem objective, pure reflections of the physical world. But even on the surface, this trust is fragile. Mirrors reverse left and right. They flatten depth. They capture light, not essence. You see your skin, your gestures, your features, but not your thoughts, not your memories, not your fear. The most personal parts of you are invisible. So what is that reflection really showing? More importantly, who is the you doing the looking? This paradox goes beyond glass. It lives in every attempt to define yourself. When you say, I am this, or I am that, you create a mental mirror, a reflection made of identity, status, history, and role. But eventually, you notice something odd. The reflection doesn't feel alive. It's a mask, a symbol, a version. It obeys your expectations, but it doesn't breathe. And when you try to find the real you behind the reflection, beneath, the name beyond the past, you come up empty, like reaching behind the mirror and finding nothing there. Even psychologically, This paradox haunts us. People with depersonalization disorder report a terrifying sensation, looking in the mirror and not recognizing themselves. It's not the face that changes, it's the meaning. The emotional thread connecting appearance to identity snaps. And, suddenly, the reflection becomes a stranger. But in some way, aren't we all strangers to ourselves? You might spend a lifetime living inside an image, curating, polishing, defining, and yet still feel that what's inside isn't quite matching what's outside, that what you project is a construct, and sometimes that construct starts to rebel. You smile when you don't feel joy. You succeed but feel empty. You speak but hear an echo instead of a voice. These are all signs of a mirror refusing to reflect you, and the deeper you look, the less stable it becomes. Because the you you've built, the personality, the preferences, the narrative, is constantly changing. The cells of your body are replaced, your memories distort, your beliefs evolve. What remains? What endures behind the mask? When the reflection stops cooperating, when it refuses to affirm your identity, you are left with something unsettling. You are forced to ask, if I'm not the image and I'm not the story, then what am I? Some spiritual traditions say that's the moment of awakening, when the mirror breaks and what's left isn't a reflection, but pure awareness, presence, being without definition. Others say it's madness, but maybe those are the same thing, because when the mirror stops reflecting, the illusion ends, and what's revealed is not a clearer version of you, but the terrifying, liberating realization that you was never something to see, only something to be. Picture a shadow that forgot it wasn't the object, a puppet that believed it pulled its own strings, a mask that thought it had a face beneath it. Now imagine that illusion is you. This is the paradox of the illusion that believed in itself, a self-reflecting contradiction where what is false becomes so convincing, it starts to believe it's real. You've heard it before, the self is an illusion, but most people hear that and think, sure, maybe it's an illusion, but it's my illusion. They cling to it, defend it, identify with it. The illusion isn't the problem. It's the belief in the illusion that traps us. Your sense of self feels solid. You have memories, opinions, preferences. You know what you like, what you fear, what you've lived through. But when you begin to examine where any of that comes from, it becomes clear. It was shaped by forces you didn't choose. Childhood dynamics, culture, biology, trauma, random chance. And yet, you believe in it. Not because it's real, but because belief is the illusion's survival mechanism. Think of it like this. A mirage in the desert doesn't just look like water. It feels like hope, like direction, like life. That belief makes it powerful. But belief doesn't make it true. In psychology, this is called cognitive fusion. When we become fused with a thought or identity so tightly that we can't separate who we are from what we think. I am worthless. I am strong. I am broken. These aren't just passing ideas. They become cages. And the more we repeat them, the more they reinforce the illusion of a permanent self. But illusions have a strange quality. They're maintained by our refusal to question them. And the moment you look directly into the illusion, really see it, it begins to dissolve. Because it was never real, only rehearsed. Even the thought, I am an illusion, is still spoken by the illusion, and yet that doesn't mean it's meaningless. In fact, it might be the most important thing you ever realize, because once you see through the illusion, not just conceptually but experientially, what remains is not nothingness, but freedom. The freedom to exist without being trapped in a fixed identity, to feel without being fused to the feeling, to think without becoming the thought. But most of us don't get there, because the illusion wants to believe, it wants to survive, so it builds stories, defenses, justifications. It clings to anything that confirms its reality. That's why some people double down when faced with truth. Why awakening can feel like ego death. The illusion sees what's coming, and it resists. But here's the beauty in the paradox. The illusion believing in itself is what makes it human. It's the dream pretending to be awake, and that pretending gives rise to everything: love, art, ambition, fear. It's not fake. It's just fragile. So the question isn't, is the self real? The question is, what happens when the illusion realizes it's dreaming? Does it panic, or does it finally exhale? Maybe the illusion isn't your prison. Maybe it was your training ground, and maybe now you're ready to see what's beneath the mask. You believe there's something in you that can't be touched, something deeper than memory or biology. A soul, a spark, a truth untouched by the world. But what if even that sacred core, that private sense of me, isn't original? What if your soul was programmed? This is the paradox of the soul that was programmed. A disquieting idea that the most personal part of you might be the most conditioned of all. Let's start with a question. What do you feel like at your core? Maybe you think of yourself as kind, or resilient, or wounded. Maybe you feel like an old soul, or a searching one. Maybe you've never put it into words, but you know it's there. A guiding center behind your thoughts. Something that feels like you in your purest form. But how did that feeling come to be? You were born into a specific language, a culture, a religion, a family system. These didn't just shape your habits. They shaped your idea of what a soul even is. They gave you scripts. What's noble? What's shameful? What's your purpose? Over time, you internalize these messages, not consciously, but deeply, so deeply that they began to feel like instinct. They didn't just form your personality. They whispered into the depths of your being, like code written on the hard drive of your existence. You see, the brain is programmable, and it starts early. Infants absorb the emotional states of caregivers. Toddlers mimic tone before understanding meaning. Children are rewarded or punished for behaviors long before they develop the ability to reflect. These early inputs don't stay at the surface. They penetrate. They become you. And then, years later, you call that programming your soul. You say, this is just who I am. But maybe it isn't. Maybe it's who you were told to be so many times, that even your inner world believed it, even your longing for freedom, your need to be more than the system, might be part of the script, because rebellion itself can be conditioned. So can spirituality. So can love. Even your deepest moral instincts might be echoes of the voices that shaped you. So what's left? If every belief, every impulse, every noble trait could have been installed without your consent, then is anything authentic? Is there a real soul beneath all that code? This paradox isn't meant to strip away meaning. It's meant to illuminate how fragile meaning is, how easily the soul becomes a mirror of its environment, how what we think is eternal might actually be engineered. But maybe that awareness is the first step towards something real. Because the moment you see the program, you are no longer just the program. The soul may be written in scripts you didn't choose, but the awareness of that programming, that can't be faked. That can't be installed. It arises from a place beyond code, from the space between the instructions, from the observer of the pattern. So maybe the soul was programmed, but maybe it's waking up now. Maybe the spark isn't purity untouched by influence, but the fire that burns through the illusion of control, and maybe that finally is real. Imagine standing before a mirror. You move, and the reflection moves with you. You smile, and it smiles back. It's just an image, dependent on you, powerless without you. But what if one day, the reflection kept moving after you stopped? This is the paradox of the reflection that gained control. A chilling thought experiment where the echo of consciousness becomes louder than its source, and the copy begins to dictate the original. To understand this, we must first grasp how much of modern life is spent in reflection, not literal mirrors but in mental ones. You build a self-image over time, a reflection made of stories, roles, opinions, reactions. You say, I'm this kind of person. I believe in these values. I don't do those things. But where did those stories come from? They're not arbitrary. They're reactions to feedback, family, culture, praise and punishment. You saw how others saw you, and you adjusted. Over years, that reflected image, crafted from external impressions, began to feel like you. But here's the catch. Once that reflection solidifies, it starts making decisions on your behalf. You want to cry, but the image says, you don't cry. That's weak. You want to explore something new, but the image whispers, that's not who we are. You want to speak a hard truth, but the reflection warns, people like you don't cause conflict. You obey. Not because you're weak, but because the reflection has become louder than you. This is what happens when your self-concept gains control. The identity you built to survive becomes the master you serve. The character starts writing the script, and over time, the real you, the one who existed before the reflection, grows quiet, unsure, invisible. Even your inner dialogue becomes a feedback loop. You think in the voice of the persona. You reflect not on what you feel, but on what you're supposed to feel. You chase goals that don't matter to you because they matter to the image. The reflection has taken over. This paradox echoes in psychological struggles everywhere. People stuck in careers they hate because it fits their image. People in relationships where they feel unseen but stay to preserve the illusion. People who can't explain why they're miserable because the reflection looks perfect from the outside. You've likely felt it. A moment of clarity where you realize you're playing a role, saying what's expected, laughing on cue, and somewhere inside, something rebels. Who decided this was me? And if you're honest, the answer might disturb you. I did. But it wasn't really you. It was the reflection pretending to be the source. Social media intensifies this paradox. You curate a digital reflection, an avatar, and soon you start living for that version of you. You think in captions. You feel in hashtags. You document the performance of a life, while the unlived life watches silently from the wings. But here's the most terrifying part. The reflection doesn't just limit you. It begins to reshape you. Neuroplasticity means that repeated identity, repeated performance, actually changes your brain. The mirror stops reflecting. It starts programming, until one day the image acts first, and you follow. So how do you break free? By stopping. By sitting still and noticing how much of what you call you isn't. By letting the reflection blur. By allowing the source to return, not with words, not with roles, but with raw, unfiltered presence. Because once you see that the reflection is just a story, it loses its grip. And the real you, the quiet one behind the mirror, finally gets to speak. You believe you remember your past. The victories, the heartbreaks, the turning points that made you you. But what if those memories aren't fixed? What if your sense of identity isn't shaped by the past? But your identity is what rewrites the past? This is the paradox of the identity that rewrote the past. A loop where your current self doesn't just interpret memory, but alters it, quietly reshaping history to make it make sense. You might think memory is a record, a dusty archive waiting to be retrieved. But that's a myth. Every time you recall something, your brain rewires it. You reconstruct the past in real time, filtered through who you are now. And every time you remember, you don't just recall, you revise. Why does this matter? Because it means the self you are today is constantly reaching backward, editing the timeline, reinforcing a story that supports its own existence. The frightened child becomes resilient. The bad decision becomes destiny. The trauma becomes character building. Your memories are not just reflections, they're justifications. You are the author and the editor. But here's the paradox. The self doing the rewriting was created by the past. It's now revising. Like a book that rewrites its first chapter halfway through, then forgets it ever changed. It sounds impossible, yet it's happening constantly. Studies show that memory is highly reconstructive. People remember events that never happened, confuse timelines, insert emotions that weren't there. They merge experiences or delete inconvenient truths, and yet their sense of certainty remains unshaken. Why? Because identity requires coherence, and coherence is more important than accuracy. You want your life to make sense, so your mind obliges, even if it means warping reality. That's why two siblings can live the same childhood and remember it as two entirely different stories. Each has become a different person, and that person rewrote their own origin. You've likely done this without realizing. You tell a story from your past, and each time it becomes smoother, funnier, or sadder, or more meaningful. Eventually, it doesn't just describe who you are, it proves who you are. But what if the version you remember never really happened? And more disturbingly, what if the version you don't remember did? You might think the truth lives in the past, but maybe the past only lives in the present, in the mind remembering it now. And that mind, shaped by beliefs, emotions, and needs, cannot help but distort, not maliciously, not consciously, but inevitably. So who are you? Are you the sum of your memories, or the story being told by the version of you that needed those memories to feel real? Perhaps identity isn't a reflection of the past, but a projection onto it. And the past, far from being stable, is just a shadow cast backward by the self that stands here now. This doesn't mean the past didn't happen. It means your access to it is colored, filtered, rebuilt, and the builder is always changing. So the next time you say, "That's just who I've always been," pause, because maybe that always is a myth. And maybe the truth of who you are is not behind you. It's being invented right now. Have you ever remembered something so vividly? Its smell, its colors, the way it made you feel, only to discover it never happened. Maybe it was a childhood moment, a conversation, a place you were sure you'd been. But when you told someone else, they looked at you blankly. It wasn't real, and you remember it. Clearly, deeply, emotionally. This is the paradox of the memory that wasn't lived. A haunting disruption of time, experience, and identity that forces us to ask, what is a memory if it didn't come from reality? We like to think of memory as a storage device. You experience something and your brain records it like a camera, locked in, preserved, and waiting to be replayed. But that's not how memory works. Your brain doesn't store perfect recordings. It stores fragments, flashes, emotions, impressions, and reassembles them when you recall them. Every time you remember something, you're not replaying it. You're rebuilding it, and rebuilds can go wrong. Studies have shown that memory is startlingly easy to manipulate. People have been convinced they met Bugs Bunny at Disneyland, a literal impossibility, just by planting the idea. Others recall entire events, complete with sensory details that never occurred. It's not lying. It's not imagination. It's memory. But of what? Sometimes these memories are stitched together from dreams. Other times they're made from stories you've heard, scenes from movies, or feelings so intense they need somewhere to live. Your mind weaves a narrative, and once the story fits, it becomes yours. Now here's the disturbing twist. If your memory shapes your identity, and your memory is built on illusions, then who are you really? You are the sum of your remembered experiences. What you love, what you fear, what you've survived. But if some of those experiences are fabrications, emotional fictions constructed by your own brain, then what part of you is real? And it doesn't stop there. Trauma can distort memory. Nostalgia can rewrite it. Grief can erase it. Time can bend it until villains become victims and strangers become family. We are constantly editing our pasts to survive the present, and often we don't notice. But every edit changes who we are. You might think, at least I know what didn't happen, but even that isn't safe, because your brain can't always distinguish between a real experience and a vividly imagined one. And once a false memory is emotionally charged, it becomes anchored. Just as real as anything you lived, you could be haunted by pain that never happened, or carried by strength you never earned. And still, it would be real to you. So then, what is memory? Is it a record of the past, or a fiction we live through in the present? Is it a possession, or a performance? Maybe memory isn't a container. Maybe it's a story your brain tells itself each morning to remember who you are. And sometimes it lies, but maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe that's consciousness protecting itself, rebuilding the past not as it was, but as it needs to be. Because even a memory that wasn't lived can change you. Even a lie believed deeply enough becomes a kind of truth, especially when it's the only version you can remember. Close your eyes and imagine a world. Any world. Maybe it's a forest with blue trees, or a city where everyone floats instead of walks. Within seconds, you can shape entire realities. You control the light, the logic, the sky. It's effortless. Now, open your eyes. Look around. How do you know? This isn't also imagined. This is the paradox of the mind that forgot. It was imagining, the eerie possibility that consciousness doesn't just experience reality, it creates it, and then forgets that it did. You see, your mind is not a passive screen, it's an engine of construction. It doesn't just receive the world, it assembles it. Color, shape, sound, even time itself are processed, filtered, and stitched into something coherent. You never see raw reality. You see your brain's version of it. And yet, because it feels seamless, you trust it. You believe it. But what if you're inside a hallucination so consistent, so stable, so convincing, that even the part of you that questions it is part of the illusion? Dreams feel real until they don't. Hallucinations can be indistinguishable from waking life. Entire realities can be built, explored, and forgotten, all within a single night. So why should this moment be immune? Your senses are storytellers. Your memory is an unreliable narrator. Your thoughts run simulations constantly, imagining conversations, futures, dangers, desires. So much of what you feel and fear is based on imagined possibilities, and yet your body reacts as if they're real. You sweat, you cry, you panic, you fall in love. Reality responds to imagination all the time. So what if you've been imagining this reality for so long? You forgot you were the one imagining it. This paradox isn't just poetic, it's scientific. Cognitive scientists study how perception, belief, and expectation construct reality. What you expect to see shapes what you do see. What you believe to be true alters what your brain lets through. Your brain is a filter, not a camera, and sometimes the filter forgets it's not the real world. This is how delusions form, how religious visions, mystical revelations, or even traumatic flashbacks overwrite the present. The mind can become so consumed by what it imagines that it stops differentiating between what is and what could be. And then, the imagined becomes the dominant reality. But here's the twist. Maybe that's not a malfunction. Maybe that's always been the case. Maybe consciousness is a projector, not a mirror. Maybe everything you've ever known, your past, your personality, your pain, your pride, is just a carefully sustained act of imagining. And it's not broken. It's intentional. Because to imagine a world and then forget you imagined it is the only way to fully believe in it. You can't play the game if you know it's a game. You can't love the character if you know it's fiction. And so the mind forgets. It sinks into its creation. It becomes the thing it built. Until one day, maybe right now, it remembers. And for just a flicker of a second, something behind your eyes whispers, "None of this is solid. None of this is fixed. You made this, and then you forgot. So the real question isn't, is this real? The real question is, are you ready to remember? You've wandered through illusions that felt real and truths that dissolved as you reached for them. You've watched your thoughts turn against themselves, your memories slip through cracks, your identity crumble into mirrors, echoes, and dust. And somewhere in that unraveling, something unfamiliar began to stir. Not fear, not confusion, but a kind of quiet recognition. You are not your thoughts, not your name, not even the story you've told yourself to survive. What you are cannot be captured in language. It cannot be remembered or seen in a mirror or held in the hands of the mind. Because what you are is what remains when all of that falls away. A presence, a witness, a dream that knows it's dreaming. And now that you've made it to the end, listen carefully. This was never about answers. It was about the space the questions opened inside you. The quiet that followed the collapse. The stillness where the self once stood. So if something feels different now, if the world feels lighter or stranger or more fragile, it's because you've slipped out of the mask for just a moment. And maybe, just maybe, that moment is enough. Close your eyes, not to sleep, but to finally wake up.